Elmer Kroeker, and I guess when we were making a decision on what we were going to do, I know we met with the pastor and he filled out with us some papers so we could obtain being a conscientious objector. And that was, till we left, there was not much going on after that for a while.
Okay, I'm Kenny Froese, and I've lived at Buhler all my life, or Buhler address. But anyway, we talked with our preacher and discussed more or less the same thing Elmer was talking about. And we decided with several other guys that we would go to Newtown, Connecticut. We had Milford went, Orville and Leland Regier went, and Guy Riffle went. We were 5 guys in 4 cars that took off for it. But anyway, that's how it all started.
It started in January 1, 1953 is when we left, what he's talking about. And we ended up in a mental hospital in Connecticut. And to get there, first of all, we had a guy, H.B. Schmidt, lived somewhere towards Gossel, that's got us the different places we could choose to go. But at that point, like he said, we went 5 guys in 4 cars.
And then your name?
Milford Lohretz.
Well, just like Milford said, we went to Gossel to talk to Mr. H.B. Schmidt, and we were just about a week ahead of these other guys. Pete Neufeld, Len Schrag, Ernie Weens, and myself. And he suggested that, why don't you go to Connecticut? Well, we didn't know anything about that. That's a long ways away. But we decided that night we were going to do that. And when I got home, that was a bad thing to say, because they thought, why in the world when you go that far? But we left in December of '52, and we got there just a week ahead of you guys, I think. And yeah, I was scared, because they when we got there, we were all 4 of us were over 6 feet, and the guys that were already there said, "Oh, this is good. They're going to like this." Well, why? Well, they have a criminally insane ward and another one right below that, and that's where you guys will probably end up. And some of us did.
Well, I don't really remember that quite so much, but I know this Reverend Schmidt suggested different places we could go, and I don't know what reason we picked Connecticut to go, Fairfield State Hospital, but like I said before, there were 4 of us, or 5 of us, that decided to go there, and that's what we did.
And I went to Connecticut too, and I worked the infirmary ward and that hospital in Connecticut we went to had 3,000 patients there. So I worked a male ward that had to do with medical changes or adjustments.
We didn't have any job when we got there. We didn't have any promises. He just said that they were hiring, so when we got there, they said, we really aren't hiring anymore. Well, we were there, but they said, make sure you tell people at home that don't send any more. Well, we said there's 5 guys on the way. And they hired all of us.
Well, I think the governor had told the superintendent of the hospital to hire 55 1Ws. And that's what he did. He hired 55 of us, and then he cut it off because actually the administrator didn't like 1Ws. He was an ex-Navy man, but we got along. We got along good. Yeah.
Well, I never did.
We were asked to go. They wanted about a half a dozen 1Ws to work outside during the summer to do whatever needed to be done on the grounds, whether it was planting bushes, whether it was mowing lawn, or something like that. And our department there were 6 of us 1Ws that went outside. And we worked in a department where there were 6, we called them XGIs. And we got along fabulously with those. We never had any problem. The only thing that one guy ever said about us, what would you do if somebody come and threatened your family and you had a weapon? What would you do?
Do you remember what you said to that question?
There was only one thing I said, I don't know what I'd do. That's the only comeback I could have,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Oh. I worked in an infirmary ward, like I say, and it was a come and go thing where some patients would come in and then their parents would come visit and there was a conflict. They didn't understand in Connecticut what a 1W was. It was totally unfamiliar to them. And since we grew up in this Mennonite community here, it was a natural for us to grow up and understand that.
All right. So then I assume that you found yourself having to explain, about your 1W and your faith a lot then.
Not in Connecticut, we didn't. Somehow, well, we knew it was trouble if we were going to be bragging about it, or because there were people from our age that are in the going to the military, and here we were kind of, well, we weren't military, but it was a conflict out of our home families too to go.
I don't know if it changed. I never had any doubt that this is the way I wanted to do it. And sometimes maybe you would have done things different if you were not in a situation where people were looking at what you were doing. But I don't think that my faith really changed any because of that.
Well, we really had a close-knit 1W unit there. We even rented a church basement for Sunday evening services, and any 1W that wanted to come to that or had off that day, sometimes we had to work weekends naturally, and then we would have a service there. And we even formed a chorus there, a men's chorus. And I don't know if we went out more than one time, but we went to New York, to the Bowery, to the soup kitchen, and sang there for those people. And we could walk the streets there. In those times, we could walk the streets. And I remember meeting a young man. He was probably a few years older than I was. He was on the streets there. He was one of them that lived on the streets. And he was very cordial, to us. And he walked with us as we strolled along there. And we asked him, well, why don't you go out and get you a job, and do something? He said, I like to live here. I want to live here. And that was his whole spiel,
No, my faith was strong enough when I went there. And one of the things that to me was important you didn't go there trying to convince those local people about something they knew nothing about. And here we were coming from Kansas to Connecticut, which was very unusual for people our age to be moving around like that. It was very interesting to us, too, the fact that we were only 1 hour from New York City, and that gave us some opportunity to kind of look for more in the world than Buhler had to offer.
Yeah, that was a big shock because I was afraid. I was scared what was going to happen. Because being in a mental hospital, never done anything like that before. And you had to get used to what was going on. There were like 90 patients that we took care of, and they were all liable to do anything. I spent a lot of time separating fights.
Was there anything, do you remember like the first thing that really just kind of, you had to step back and say, whoa, this is,
Yeah. When you went in there, they didn't give you any keys. If you were in there with all those men with no keys, there's no way you could get out. That was the training they gave you, so you became aware of the locked doors. And that it bothered me.
Well, I remember the first day I was there. I worked in a building that had 3 floors with probably 300 patients on each floor. And the supervisor of the building took me in there, and we walked through a ward. He was going to introduce me to some of the other employees. And I looked up, and behind me there was a patient with a big, he used it to polish floors.
His name was Lagerfeld.
Yeah, and he had it wrapped in cloth or something to push it. It was a big, heavy log. He had like a handle on there, and that way. Well, he lifted that up, and he was behind me like that while and I took off. And the supervisor, he just laughed. And this patient did that to every new employee.
Oh, scared him to death.
Scared him to death. He would never hurt you.
Right.
Would never hurt you.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Never saw him hit anybody, not even. But he could do that, and then he'd just walk off and just kind of grin.
Oh, he was okay.
Well, when we left here, it took us from Monday to Friday to get to Connecticut because we ended up in an ice storm after we got to Missouri. The rest of the way we drove on ice. And so we got there Friday, and it was too late to meet with in the office to get employed. And so then we stayed in a motel over the weekend, and it was very stressful not knowing what we're coming into Monday morning. We just didn't know. And so that's how we spent the first weekend away from home.
Yeah. Was there anything when you got working that was your first big shock you had?
Well, the medical part was very renewing, or I didn't know much about medical, and I ended up on, like I say, the infirmary ward, and had to do quite a bit of talking with doctors, and then I was I just didn't know what to expect, and they tried to introduce us to some of the problems.
Yeah.
2 years, we were required to be there, but I think we stayed 2 months longer because our service was over in January. And what would we do at home in the middle of winter? So we stayed 2 months longer, and we come home in March then instead of January.
You could confess a little about that deal.
What?
They left before we did. Orville and I stayed longer, and they left. And they thought I should get up and say goodbye to them in the morning. Well, I wasn't going to do that. So they got my roommate to leave the door open, and they poured a whole bucket of water on me in bed.
As a going away present.
And then they went in their own beds and wet them too, so that I couldn't have any bed. It was wet. And he has never confessed yet, but I know he was in on it.
How do you know? I was
Because I heard you laughing.
Oh, man.
So everything wasn't serious. Well, the best thing is we got away from home, and we found out there were other ways of living and making a living even than what we did if we'd have stayed home completely. Not that we changed anything, but there were other ways. We got introduced to things. And just the experience was the best thing in the world. I would recommend that to anybody.
Yeah, I think, for one thing, we played sports. I mean, we rented, or not rented, but we could use the gym in town, and there would be other employees, not just 1Ws, playing basketball with us. And we had a good, fast-pitch softball team, and we played other teams from like Long Island and all that, and we won some games, but we weren't the best. You know, we weren't very well organized. But it wasn't just 1Ws. It could anybody from the hospital could play on that team if they wanted to. And I know they always told us, you'll never hit that pitcher from Long Island. He's too fast, you know. And it took us about 3 or 4 innings, but we finally connected with him. We lost the game, but we were so proud of ourselves because we even hit his balls, you know, and that was interesting, and that was fun. It was fun.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing I remember most is just the culture change from the living in a little area like Buhler, then going to Connecticut where it was just totally different than what we grew up in. And so it was an adjustment, but when I think back to the thing, it was good we had that thing we had to do. We didn't choose to do it. We were drafted it, plain and simple. And that was part of the education of being away from Buhler.
Well, our pastor never came to see us. Well, nobody came to see us. We were too far away. But I don't remember anything that the church did special for us that we were different than what we would have had at home.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's about what I'd say too.
It was such a common thing for us out of this community that it wasn't really challenged at all at home.
Right.
And at home, like I say, once we were in Connecticut, we just didn't arouse the public about something they were totally unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
We made real good friendships. Lots of friends. We have had quite a few 1W reunions since then. We've been to Pennsylvania. I don't know where all we've been.
Yeah.
For 1W. So that was another thing. We changed our friends completely. I mean, we added a lot more friends.
Right.
What was important to me is there were a lot of boys came from Pennsylvania in Virginia there, and they grew up in a different type of community than we did, and we became well acquainted with them, and they became good friends in this whole circle of our group up there.
I know the brethren did, and there were old Mennonites at that time, and I don't think we had any Amish boys, did we?
I don't think so.
I don't think.
I don't think so. But
No, we fit in real easy. Like he said, we stayed a couple of months extra because it wasn't a good plan, we felt, to come back into this community in January when there's no work available. I'd say that it was a good education that sometimes I think some of my family, as they grew up, it would have been a good experience for them that we missed, that they didn't get, that we got.
I think too, we failed a little by not promoting a voluntary service or some kind of a service after we got home, because that to me that made a big difference in my life of being where we went and what we did, because it was completely opposite of what we were used to.
Yeah, I remember there were many memories made while we were there and after we went home. We still connect with one or two persons that one lives in South Dakota.
South Dakota.
And he calls Elmer almost every week, and
Every
he calls
Saturday.
me once in a while. Yeah, and we just talk about generalization of what happened and what we remember from there. And this particular person, he was one of the first ones
Yes.
there. He was married.
He was married and they had a child there.
They had a child there, and he's probably a year or two older than we are, I think.
He's a couple of years older.
Yeah.
And I babysat their first child one night, and I have no idea why or how I got into that. But I visit with him every once in a while. He's a terrific runner. He still runs it, and he's got to be 60, 70 years old.
So you all would recommend to any young people that are watching to go into voluntary service?
I
then?
would.
Some kind of a service that
Yeah.
Very good.
you don't miss it. I mean, in your life, the 2 years doesn't set you back. It's
No, it don't.
it helps you.
Agree with that.
We went to a lot of ball games in New York. We saw the Yankees, the Dodgers.
We went to Madison Square Garden, and now we see it on TV, and I wonder,
We were there.
They even had a rodeo in Madison Square Garden, and they quit that for a while. But
They have
now they
one.
do it again.
They have one now. They advertise it on
They're
TV.
going to have one
They
Yeah.
have
now.
one.
How they
But-
do that, when I see that whole thing on TV, how they can put a rodeo back in there is amazing to me.
Yeah, I remember they had Roy Rogers there and Gene Autry. They were the
Featured.
main person. They were there to promote the rodeo, and and it was, and a lot of, like he said, a lot of ball games. Went to a lot of ball, and for some reason, I don't think we had any reason to be scared to walk around in New York City. We left our cars sometimes on the outskirts, took the subway in. We left our cars out there in a parking lot that we didn't even have to pay anything for it, and just left them set there, and they were there when we got back.
I don't know if you guys were with me, but I was pretty naive. those roads, you know, we didn't know about roundabouts or anything like that, or how to get on an interstate. One day in New York, all of a sudden we come up on the road. Whoa, they're all coming our way. So we stopped up on top, and there was a cop down below, and he says, "I'll help you down." I had no idea what we were doing.
One of the experiences I remember much, like I said, we got in an ice storm. And when we got up into some place, and I think it was upstate New York, and we got on a road where the ice was so bad we couldn't get up the hill. So 4 of us pushed the car up the hill, then we walked back down and did that to all four of the cars we had. We had to push them up that icy hill.
Man, wow.
And I remember coming up one hill, it had a curve, the road curved, and sometimes we'd try to get a speed to get up the hill. Well, there it curved and we couldn't get up a speed, so we had to take our floor mats out of the car, and the guys would walk behind and throw those floor mats. And we did that to every car till we got up the hill. And we seen cars all of a sudden in front of us do a cartwheel and off they went. Semis were jackknifed. It was quite hairy.
And we were just ahead of that storm. We didn't have
Oh,
anything
man.
like that.
Yeah. Wow. If that's all you guys are done sharing, thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you.